Fellows, broadcast today. This is 24/7 World Radio. I trust that you're enjoying a wonderful day today on this November 22nd, 2023. I have with me today our most illustrious guest, George Widger. Brother George, welcome to the broadcast here at 24/7 World Radio with Brother Eric John.
Likewise, it is a pleasure to be on with you. Is today the 22nd? I thought it was the 21st.
I said the 21st, didn't I say that?
Oh, I thought you said 22nd.
I might have, but it's the 21st, so thank you, George.
Oh, okay. Well, it's the 21st, well, in much of the world, places like Australia.
But it's the 21st today here in the US of A on a Tuesday. So welcome to the broadcast, George.
Okay, well, thank you.
So what do you have for us listeners today?
Okay, well, one of these days I'm going to have to get organized, and
that always helps. The only harder thing than getting organized is staying organized. So,
yeah. Yes. Well, my scripture verse is Mark 1 verse 30. Mark 1 verse 30. And Simon's wife, i.e., Simon Peter's wife's mother, lay sick of fever, and anon they tell him of her. Okay, so this is fairly straightforward. So, all right, in the Bible, one of the major New Testament figures is Peter, known as Simon Peter in English. He's also known as Cephas or Cephas from, I guess that's Latin, if I'm not mistaken. And of course, I'm sure I'll get somebody who will correct me on that. They said, no, George, that's wrong. Jesus was speaking Aramaic, and anyhow, any sort of mistakes notwithstanding. Okay, so Simon Peter was one of the major figures in the New Testament. He's one of the 12 apostles, and he was a friend of Jesus. Now, why do I bring him up? You notice that, I'll repeat that, but Simon's wife's mother lay sick of fever, and anon they tell him of her. So you don't know anything odd about that.
Looks to me, George, looks to me like to have a wife and you have a wife's mother. That sounds like a mother-in-law. So it sounds like Simon Peter was married. So that can't possibly be the Simon Peter of popery.
Okay, so Catholic apologists like Carl Kadings and others have addressed that. Said yes, Simon Peter had a mother-in-law, and yes, he had a wife, and they have no qualms with that. But that was an existing condition that happened before he became a disciple. Now, of course, so it's just like
that's a good one. Yeah, that's a very erudite lie. Go ahead, George.
Okay, it's just like an existing condition you have when you sign up for health insurance. They said, "Oh, we can't cover that because you have that before you sign up with us. We'll cover everything else, even though it'll bankrupt you." So I don't say pre-existing because that's redundant. But that's besides the point. So yes, Simon had a mother-in-law. Sorry, there's something in my throat. Simon had a mother-in-law because he had a wife, meaning he was married. But Catholics, as I said, like Carl Keating, would say, well, that happened before he became a disciple. And Catholics will
that's ridiculous because Christ healed his mother-in-law after he became a disciple. So that's a ridiculous argument. Go ahead, George.
Okay, so then you're talking about the whole argument of unmarried clergy and prelacy. The Catholic Church said, well, that didn't develop until centuries later in the West, not so much in the East. And they said, yes, Simon Peter was married. And when Paul enumerates the qualifications for bishops, i.e. pastors, in 1 Timothy 3, he says a bishop must be blameless, the husband of one wife. And I'm not going to talk about that passage. Well, in the, I guess, in the New Age Reams and the New American Standard, which are Catholic Bibles, they say a bishop is to have been married only once.
Oh, really?
Meaning that he could have, he could be a widower, his wife could have died, or something like that. And So they try to, fight the issue.
Yep. I know some Baptists like that too. The text says he's a husband of one wife at the time. You can't add anything to that.
Well,
Hey, brother?
okay, so I'm not a Greek scholar by any stretch of the imagination, and I'm not even an English scholar by any stretch of the imagination. But the actual term in Greek is gune, from which we get our word gynecologist. So it says an episkopos, a bishop, a pastor, an overseer, is to be the husband of but one woman.
That's
And
right.
I don't mean to quibble here, but anyhow, so Simon Peter was married, and they said, well, Catholics will say, sure, they had no problem. Yes, he was married. Several of the popes, or future so-called popes and bishops of Rome, were married. But as I said, that tradition, that discipline, didn't develop until centuries later.
That's right. With Gregory in the 7th century.
So, but anyhow, so, but as I said, as we've discussed before, people need to know what words mean. There is connotation and then there's denotation. Denotation is what something actually says, it's the actual definition. Connotation is what something suggests. So, celibacy simply means unmarried. Now, being sexually pure and inactive, that means chaste. They're not synonymous, or at least in the Catholic Church, they have not. They have not been. Forgive my little cough.
But you might want to have a glass of water next to you and sip the water while you're talking because your throat dries out and then you start to cough. So you might want to just have a glass of water there and just sip on it while you're speaking. Okay?
Oh, okay.
I learned that lesson the hard way. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Well, actually, if I die during the broadcast, I guess I won't have to give my contact information.
I guess not, George.
Oh, okay. So, anyhow, so here in North America, it is still November the 21st, Tuesday, November the 21st, 20. Okay, I should get the century right. 2023. If we're still saying 19, we have an issue here. We probably wouldn't be on the air like this in this format. But anyhow, so tomorrow marks the 60th anniversary of the death of President John Fitzgerald Kennedy. I know that's your bailiwick. I know you wrote your book, Vatican Assassins, about that, and you've done numerous broadcasts about that. And I know that usually around this time, round about November the 22nd, you liked doing something about that. I know we did that a couple years, 2-3 years ago. So the only thing I have to add to that is I need to cover some old material. I know you've spoken at great lengths about the Supreme Court Justice at the time, Earl Warren.
Let me interrupt for just a second, George.
Yes.
Somebody sent me a book called The Final Witness. Mm-hmm. A Kennedy Secret Service agent breaks his silence after 60 years. And it's authored by Paul Landis. Well, Paul Landis was there in the backup vehicle of the limousine when Kennedy was shot. And Paul Landis was there with his good friend, Clint Hill. So Paul Landis has come out with this book, and it was released in, 2023, this year. And he tells us that he is the one who discovered the pristine bullet in the limousine that was behind Jackie's back there and on the seat. And so he found it, and he put it in his pocket, and he carried it around. And in the hospital, he puts it on a gurney, on JFK's gurney. Well, Oliver Stone says in his movie it was Jack Ruby who put the pristine bullet on the gurney, but this guy says he's the one who did it.
So you said it.
And this will go on to be the single bullet for the single bullet theory, this and unmarked. So Paul Landis is the one who does this. He also goes on to say that there's only one shooter, 3 shots. So he is an inveterate liar, and he's going to lie till the day he dies, along with his little best friend, Clint Hill, who wrote another book called Jackie and Me, where he is and also claims there's only one shooter and 3 shots. So Clint Hill and Paul Landers are 2 great Secret Service liars that are purposed to lie till the day they die rather than tell the truth. The JFK was killed as a result of a conspiracy that was proven in the 1976 Assassinations Committee. So we're going to have one last word here, the final witness, and he's going to tell a great big fat lie. So I don't recommend you get his book, His Final Witness, the Kennedy Secret Service agent breaks his silence after 60 years. Paul Landis, he acts like he's some sort of hero and some sort of celebrity in the book. But anyway, people need to realize that they're going to continue to lie about this and keep the Kennedy assassination covered up, because when you understand about that, and Francis Cardinal Spellman oversaw the whole thing, then you can understand what's happening now. Okay, George, go ahead.
Well, I'd just be interested in reading it just out of curiosity, because I like acknowledging the other side. And it may be for intelligence purposes or counterintelligence purposes. I would want to look at it. However, I have probably 100 other books I need to get to before I get around to that. Now,
well, forget this because it's worthless. You don't need it. Go ahead.
Okay, I did read Gerald Posner's Case Closed, and I know
that's another piece of trash. He's another CIA operative. You can forget him too.
Well, I read it, and of course, Gerald was born on May the 20th, 1954. He went to St. Ignatius High School in San Francisco. Now, and of course, he has the correct pedigree. He's Russian Jewish on his dad's side and Catholic Cuban on his mom's side.
Oh, good. So you have the Jew for the brains and the Catholic for the fanaticism. So wonderful. That's a great combination. The Jesuits love it. Still a liar. Posner is a great liar. But go ahead.
Okay. Anyhow, so as I said, we're just coming up on the 60th anniversary of the assassination of JFK. And so do I have anything new to add to this conversation? Well, sort of. In that one of the key figures in this story, or at least the cover, was the Supreme Court Justice Earl Warren. So just for context, for those who may not be familiar, he lived from the 19th of March, 1891, died on July the 9th, 1974. So he's 83 years old. He was on the U.S. Supreme Court from 1953 to 1969. And like a year or so after the assassination, President Lyndon Johnson, Kennedy's successor, appointed Earl Warren to look into this. Hey, what exactly?
He appointed his brother Freemason to look into it now. Yeah, brother Freemason, Gerald Ford, brother Freemason, Earl Warren, brother Freemason, there's a couple more, or J. Edgar Hoover, brother Scottish Rite Freemason, busy doing a business of the Jesuit order to carry out and to cover up the Kennedy assassination.
Okay, so now as you said that Earl Warren was a Freemason. Well, actually, do you mind if I provide some of the receipts for that, so to speak?
Sure.
Okay, so this is according to his Wikipedia page. Warren was an active member after 1919 in such groups as the Freemasons, the Independent Order of the Oddfellows, the Benevolent and Protective Order of Elks, and the Royal Loyal Order of Moose. While he was an undergrad student at University of California, Berkeley, he was a member of Sigma Phi. He was also a member of, although there are some people who dispute this, I have this from various sources, that he was a member of the Order of the Golden Bear, which is basically their version of Skull and Bones. So now this, now he had 5 children. Warren had 5 children, one of whom was his daughter, Virginia. She was married to John Daly, not the golfer. But
now hold it just a second, George. Listeners, listen to this. And George, please say this very slowly and say it a couple of times.
Okay, so what again?
Earl Warren's the father-in-law of John Daly, and you'll explain who John Daly is, and this is very important.
Okay, I know we've discussed Daly before. John Daly, so his dates, he lived from 1914 to 1991. So I believe he was born on the 24th of February, 1914, died on February 20th, so just short of his 77th birthday. He was born in Johannesburg, South Africa, because his father was a U.S. geologist who was living in South Africa at the time. And young John Daly went to Morris Brothers High School in Johannesburg, which is Catholic. Well, okay, Jesuit/Catholic. So right after he graduated from high school, I guess that would have been around about 1932, he went to Boston College, which is Jesuit in Massachusetts, where he got a degree in journalism. So we're talking about John Daly here. So from 1936 to 1950, he was a reporter for CBS Radio, Columbia Broadcast System. While he was there, he covered three of the major stories he covered were the bombing of Pearl Harbor, the death of President Franklin Roosevelt, and the slapping episode involving Army General George S. Patton.
Okay, let's say those things slowly again, George. What's the first one?
Pearl Harbor.
Pearl Harbor, which we know was a setup and validated by the great book, The Day of Deceit by Stinnett. So it was the total setup on both sides, Tokyo and Washington, to bring America into the Second 30 Years' War. So there was a conspiracy involving the bombing of Pearl Harbor, and the Jesuits were completely behind it. Okay, number two, George.
The slapping episode. Well, actually, there was two different slapping episodes involving General Patton. Now, if you saw the 1969 film with Freemason George C. Scott, there's only one episode, but that was Hollywood taking some liberties. So because he slapped or supposedly slapped a soldier that was suffering from shell shock or battle fatigue or whatever they're calling it at the time, they said, hey, we can't have you doing this. That's bad for morale. So he was not able to participate in the invasion of the mainland of Italy, specifically the Battle of Cassino. I'm sorry, Anzio.
Anzio?
Correct. So that job.
Anzio had 60,000 casualties. Anzio is the second most bloody battle that I understand in World War II. So they did that to make sure there was plenty of American servicemen killed. And by the way, at Anzio, Mark Clark was there, and he waited a couple of days for the German general to bring his army up to meet them. So I think it's Kesselring. So it was an entire conspiracy to kill off American soldiers. And if Patton would have been there, that would have not happened. So they made him a librarian. 30 centers. So the slapping episode of Patton when he slaps that soldier was a good thing. That raised the morale of the soldiers. It was probably good for the guy he slapped to get him back to reality and start being a man. And so any kind of manhood demonstrated by Patton was punished by Ike and Marshall and these other sinners working for the Jesuit order. So they punished Patton. He's not at Anzio. And then what's the third one, George?
Okay, and don't forget Montgomery. Now, granted, Montgomery was British, but he was also a major figure.
Yes, he was. Monty. Oh, yes.
Okay, so, and the death of Franklin Roosevelt.
And the murder of Franklin Roosevelt. Okay. Because he was murdered.
Okay,
he was shot in the head. He was shot in the head, and he didn't have an open casket. So FDR was again murdered by probably the intelligence community by Wild Bill Donovan and put in Dirty Harry Truman so he could carry out the bogus atomic bombing from the air of Japan, which never happened. They were detonated on the ground. So the murder of FDR. So this is what this guy's involved in.
Okay, so you have John Daly, who's Johnny on the spot. He's basically given all these stories of the century, if you will. And so who was working because at the time, you did have television, but it was in its embryonic form. Virtually nobody had them. So the way people found out about the world were a few ways. You're talking about the early mid-1940s. Your local newspaper, maybe a magazine, which the Luce or the Henry Luce ran, or actually Hearst ran, or there's a good chance that William Randolph Hearst ran it. Or you had newsreels, which you can see like once a week, or the radio. So they had fake news 80 plus years ago.
Oh, yes. Okay. Well, it was a CFR controlled. It was controlled
Well,
by the Archbishop of New York's Council on Foreign Relations. He controlled Walter Cronkite and a host of other famous broadcasters, and of course, John Daly. And Daly went to what Jesuit school?
Okay, he went to two. He went to Morris Brothers in South Africa, which historically, South Africa was a historically Protestant country. That's interesting. And then you have Boston College. So he was trained by the Jesuits for 8 years to be a journalist. And so then as I said, Daly was CBS Radio from 1936 to 1950. So television was a relatively new medium at the time. And so one of the things they did...
George, it was a Catholic broadcasting system, CBS.
Yes.
Okay, it was a Catholic broadcasting system controlled by the Archbishop of New York. And he was with CBS for how many years?
Well, in some form or another, well over 30 years. The radio from 36 to 1950, and television from 1950 to 67. So anyhow, so CBS, Columbia Broadcast System, launched a new television game show called What's My Line, which ran from 1950 to 1975. Now, in the last few years, it was syndicated, meaning that it wasn't carried by a specific network. But Daly was the host from 1950 to 1967. For those of you who are not familiar with it, you had four celebrity hosts, and they bring on a segment. Usually have 2 or 3 people, and they'd ask them questions because they usually had an unusual occupation. So, oh yes, my name's Fred Jones. Oh, okay. Well, what do you do for a living? Fred Jones is makes false teeth, and so the panelists would ask him a series of questions. Finally, they try to figure out what he does for a living. Then the show would end with a mystery celebrity guest, like a movie star or an athlete or something. But one of whom was Fulton Sheen, John Wayne. So all the big names of that era, the 1950s and 60s. So
Fulton Sheen, that Roman Catholic bishop, a wild-eyed crazy man. Now, another one we have is if John Daly is hosting What's My Line in 1963, which he is, then that's at the time Dorothy Kilgallen, the nice little Irish Catholic lady, was murdered because she said, I got the whole story from Ruby. I'm going to break the story. It wasn't long, a day or so, and she's found dead, sitting up in her dress in her apartment in her bed. So John Daly was a party to the murder of Dorothy Kilgallen. He knew all about it, and to think that he knew nothing is absurd. So another Jesuit-trained coadjutor in the covering up of the murder of someone the Jesuits deemed dangerous, and hence that was Dorothy Kilgallen. Go ahead. Who was on What's My Line?
Okay, so as I said, John Daly was married twice. His second wife, Virginia, was the daughter of Earl Warren. So we had the excellent chance that Daly was also a Freemason or some sort of secret society. I don't have evidence of that. I have speculation. So I was talking to somebody early before I got on the air with you. Is we were talking about who is related to whom or who's married to whom. Most of these elite marriages, these politicians, these media moguls, is basically medieval Europe. These are basically arranged business deals. Like I want to increase my wealth and influence, so I'll have my daughter marry your son, and that's basically it. And if you're not satisfied romantically, or if you're not happy with them, well, you either get divorced, spend millions of dollars for that, or just get a mistress on the side.
Well, that's what most of them do. Have a mistress on the side, you don't have to worry about divorce. That's what Kennedy and Jacqueline what was it?
Bouvier?
Yeah. What was her last name again? Jacqueline?
Bouvier.
Yeah, Duvier. Bouvier, that's right.
Well, it's funny. I wasn't going to bring up The Simpsons because I try not to, but
But that marriage was a unification of two powerful Roman Catholic families.
yes, just like Andrew Cuomo was married to a kitty. I forgot her. I forgot her name. I want to go look it up. But Andrew Cuomo, the now ex-governor of New York, was married to a Kennedy.
I see.
And Arnold Schwarzenegger was married to Maria Shriver, who I guess she's a Kennedy.
That's right. Another Kennedy. Yep.
Of course, the whole thing is ludicrous. Well, of course, Arnold Schwarzenegger is a conservative Republican. How could he possibly be married into the Kennedy family?
Yeah. Yeah, unless they work together, which they do.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay. And of course, Donald Trump Jr.'s current fiance / girlfriend is Kim Guilfoyle, who is the ex-wife of
the woman that was on the Fox News.
Yes. Now she got her, I believe, undergrad degree or law degree from University of San Francisco, and she's the ex-wife of Gavin Newsom.
Oh my. Kimberly Guilfoyle. I think she was at the Al Smith dinner.
Oh, she probably was. I mean,
I think she was behind them, and she was sporting her breasts so that everybody could see her large cleavage behind Trump. So yeah, that was Kimberly Guilfoyle. I'm pretty sure.
Oh, okay. So it's all one big incestuous family. So it doesn't matter. Of course, in the United States, it doesn't matter whether you call yourself a Democrat or Republican. They talk trash about each other in public. It's basically professional wrestling.
Professional what, George?
Wrestling.
Professional wrestling. It's all fake. That's right. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And we'll decide who's going to win this match, and we'll decide who's going to win that match, and all the people will think there's a real match going on, and they put in there who they want. That's right. Mm-hmm.
Now, I know I said this before, so forgive me for repeating myself, brother. But back in 2016, after the death of / murder of Anthony Scalia, President Barack Obama eulogized him, and he said a few words about Justice Scalia, and he talked about his background and his humble upbringing in Brooklyn or where he is from, and what his judicial career and all that sort of stuff. But one of the things he mentioned, that President Obama mentioned, was that despite their differences, he is personal friends with Ruth Bader Ginsburg. As a matter of fact, on a regular basis, they got together to go to the opera. Ruth with her late husband Martin, and Anthony and his wife, they said, even though they disagreed on almost everything politically, judicially, they were able to set aside these differences for a few hours to enjoy Chernot or Pavarotti.
They knew they weren't real differences. They knew that they were both working for the Jesuit order, and Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the little Jewish witch she was, doing what the Georgetown Jesuits told her to do, and her husband, I believe George, was a professor at Georgetown. Was that not correct?
Correct. And not only that, but she had received the Stein Prize, which is handed out by Louis Stein, was a Jewish professor at Fordham. Generally speaking, they hand them out once a year to prominent Jews who faithfully serve the Vatican. And so she was a recipient of that.
So Ruth Bader Ginsburg received an award from the Jesuits of Fordham.
Correct.
And what's the name of it again?
The Stein Prize.
The Stein Prize.
Named after Louis Stein, who was a professor, I believe, at Fordham.
So it gives the illusion that the Jews are running the Jesuits. Great.
As I said, Ruth met her demise back in 2020, and it was actually who replaced? Was it Barron? Who replaced her?
I'm not sure. I think it was a Trump appointee. What was his name?
No. Okay, so
Neil
Donald Trump,
Gorsuch. Was it Neil Gorsuch that replaced her?
no, it wasn't Neil Gorsuch. It was Barron.
Barron. Is that who you said?
Correct. I'm drawing a blank as to what her name was.
I can't remember. Oh! It was that Hispanic woman.
No. I'm sorry. Well, this is incredibly unprofessional of me. I shouldn't have these names at my fingertip.
Yeah, well, that's okay. She was replaced by Trump with a conservative, quote unquote.
Oh, okay. Well, here. All right. Well, her name is Barron.
Barron. The listeners of our broadcast, George, are going to be laughing at both of us. I don't know of any Supreme Court justice named Barron.
Okay, did I say Barron? Not okay. I'm drawing a blank.
Something else. We'll cover Supreme Court another day, George. So Ruth Bader Ginsburg was appointed. She died, and another was appointed by Trump. And then go on.
Oh, I'm sorry, Amy Coney Barrett.
Barrett, that's right, the Roman Catholic girl from Notre Dame.
Yes.
Woman from Notre Dame, who showed how leftist she was when she voted.
Yes, I'm sorry. Boy, that's maybe I've been hanging around Joe Biden too much because I must have caught something from him. Yes, Amy Vivian Coney.
We'll cover the Supreme Court another day, George. Okay, when we're prepared. You're prepared with your other topics, so let's just go with those. All right.
Oh, all right. Fair enough. So anyhow, so something. So so as I said, tomorrow marks the 60th anniversary of the assassination of John Fitzgerald Kennedy. And, I was just reading something recently. This is back in 2020 about somebody was doing an interview about incoming freshmen into college in the U.S. So something like 10% of U.S. I don't have a source for this. Something like 10% of incoming freshmen to U.S. colleges don't know who John Fitzgerald Kennedy was. So these people
10%, let me repeat that so it can be clear for the listener. 10% of the incoming freshmen at college don't know who John F. Kennedy was. Is that what you're saying?
Correct. So 1 out of 10. So another 10% couldn't identify when he was in office.
Well, that's a pretty well-educated electorate by the educational systems in this country. Don't you think they're doing a wonderful job?
And of course, I mean, I don't recall the exact figure. So 1 out of 10 couldn't identify him. Another 1 out of 10 couldn't say when he was in office. Like, was he in the 20th century? Was he in the 19th century? And something like 25% couldn't say how he died. Oh, yes, he died in office. No, did it? Was it a car crash? Did he have a heart attack? So you have a huge number of people who just don't know basic facts. And now granted, this happened before they were born. So what are they teaching in U.S. history? What are they teaching in U.S. civics? And we're not
teaching sex perversion and communism and for white people to hate themselves and the supremacy of the blacks and, supremacy of the feminists. That's what they're teaching. That don't you know, George? That's what you need to know to be equipped in this culture to succeed in business.
Indeed. So I remember back in the 1990s when I was at my community college history class, U.S. history. The instructor started out, before he handed out the syllabus, he said, how many of you are taking this class because you have to? Not because you want to or as part of your major. And it was probably about 90%. And he said, how many of you would not take this class if you didn't have to? And with a few exceptions, everybody said yes. Like, granted, you're talking almost 30 years ago. And basically, people's attitude is you don't need to know history. Well, if you do need to know a certain factoid, you can go Google it. And so this is
because they have no rhyme or reason as to the purpose and flow of history for the last 500 years. It's completely indecipherable to them because they don't know anything about the Protestant Reformation or the Jesuit order's counter-reformation. And if you don't know those two things, you can never understand history for the last 500 years. There is no rhyme or reason to it. But if you do understand that, then everything makes sense. Right?
Yes, and I know we've discussed it before, and I know I keep saying I'm repeating myself. Well, sometimes you had to because, well, this could be the first. Excuse me. This could be the first time people are hearing this information, and I try to do best just to present. Take a Joe Friday. We're just interested in the facts, ma'am. But I try to keep my expounding the information to a minimum. But so as I said, and I try to avoid sharing these little anecdotes, which I just did. Which I just did. Mm-hmm. And so it seems as if that for the most part, people get their history from Hollywood.
Of course, they get the morality from Hollywood. Let's race mix. You get their morality as to black supremacy in Hollywood. You get benevolent homosexuality in Hollywood. You got to put up with them, and you got to have the radical feminists accepted. So these women are beating up men in all these Hollywood movies now. You get your philosophy, you get your anthropology, you get your history, you get your sociology, all of that from Hollywood, controlled by the Jesuit order, with upfront Jews everywhere to make it look like the Jews run it when the fact is the Jesuits run it. Go ahead.
Indeed. Now, of course, the Jews are simply the managers, they're the bookkeepers, the accountants, and that is...
Yeah, the Hofjuden. Sherman Skolnick used to call them the Hofjuden, the court Jews of the Pope. That's why Bob Dylan's mother said the Pope is the king of the Jews, and it's in his book. Go ahead.
Well, and I think we've discussed Bob Dylan before. Remember, about 20 years ago, he was in an interview on 60 Minutes with Ed Bradley. And basically, this is a paraphrase. He said, Dylan was talking to Bradley. He said, I made my deal with the general a long time ago, and I'm just keeping up my side of the bargain.
And the general was the devil?
Well, he didn't say that. And he pressed him, Bradley pressed him on that. And I said, who is the general? I said, well, so are you familiar with that interview?
I'm not.
Oh, okay. I'll definitely have to send it to you. So about 20 years, 2003, 2004.
I don't mean to get you sidetracked, George, but go ahead on your train of thought about these 10% incoming freshmen of JFK, another 10%. Don't know when he was president. Go on.
And also, basically, so in other words, the majority of these incoming freshmen didn't know basic facts, that he lived from 1917 to 1963, and he was in office from 1961 till his death. Yes. So then you have layers and layers of deception and ignorance. And they said, oh, okay, well, yes, he was assassinated. Yes, he was assassinated by Lee Harvey Oswald. Well, okay, Lee Harvey Oswald didn't do it. It was the CIA. It was a rogue elements in the CIA. Well,
yeah, a rogue element in the CIA, yeah, right. Like the head of the CIA, John McCone, like Richard Helms, deputy director, like William J. Casey, he was in at the time, like the other Italian Catholic was Albert Vincent Carone, but it was Angleton's best friend. So all the top CIA officers were involved in the Kennedy assassination. To say it was a rogue element is a bold-faced lie. What was his name? It'll come to me. Go ahead. William F. Buckley, he was involved in it. You think he's rogue CIA? He's a high officer of CIA. Clay Shaw, he was not a Malta high officer CIA, obviously did it. And the Irish Catholic judge wouldn't allow evidence to be introduced in the courtroom with a Garrison that would have proved it. So, no. Raymond Rocca. Raymond Rocca was a high-level Knight of Malta, Italian Roman Catholic right-hand man of James Jesus Angleton, another Knight of Malta. So all the top CIA officers were involved in the Kennedy assassination. To say it's a rogue element is just a lie, as I prove it in my book. But what's a book? Go ahead, George.
Yes. So I'm sorry, we're probably going to have to end this broadcast at the top of the hour at about 5 p.m. because I'm having some battery issues. I probably should have taken care of that beforehand. Well, you know what? We're
George,
not.
So I can just hold the recording. You said you need to go to the bathroom?
No. What I'm going to do is just simply go plug in my phone. I'm sorry, plug in my tablet. Because I just got a message saying it's running low. So forgive me. I'm moving into the room where the charger is. So that's why you're hearing this ambient sound. Okay, so I just had a question. I thought we pretty much covered the whole John Daly story
That's really important, George. I mean, I never heard of it till you told me yesterday, and that's so important that John Daly was this key guy in the press, trained by Jesuits at Boston College, son-in-law of Earl Warren. I mean, they're all working together.
Okay, so something I've mentioned to you before is, as I said, West My Line was aired originally carried on CBS. At the time, the head of CBS programming was William Paley.
William Paley. Now, there's another Knight of Malta. I think he's a Jew, too.
Yes, he was from Chicago, got his undergrad degree from University of Pennsylvania. And his dates were 1903 to 1990. I'm going from memory here, so forgive me for being a little bit imprecise. So a couple of things you need to know about, there are a couple of facts you need to know about William Paley. And yes, I know I've covered this before, is during World War II, from 1942 to 45, he was the director of psychological warfare in England. He was a colonel in the U.S. Army. So after the war, from 1945 to 1975, as I said, he was the director of programming for CBS television. Now, Paley was also the son-in-law.
No, wait a second, George. From 1945 to 65, he was director of CBS?
Well, no, he was a director from 1945 to 1975. He was the director of CBS programming.
The Catholic Broadcast Systems, the Catholic Communist Broadcasting System programming. Okay.
Correct. Now, he was also the son-in-law of William Randolph Hearst.
Oh, George. See, that's another wonderful connection that you made for the listeners. Listen, I hope you appreciate these connections that George is giving to you, because the connection of William Paley being a son-in-law of William Randolph Hearst shows you that he's completely tied in with the Jesuit order, because William Randolph Hearst was a Knight of Malta. He was the press lord of the day. There's a book written on him called, what is it here? I have it in my office here, on him, and it's there's a book written about him in an allegorical form called Citizen Kane. William Randolph Hearst was the powerful press lord of the day. He had San Simeon in California, where he had his own little zoo. I mean, this guy is just unbelievably powerful. And in his power, he will be followed by Henry Luce, who's another Knight of Malta, and a petitioner going to participate in the Kennedy assassination. So, yeah, this William Paley connection to William Randolph Hearst is very important, George. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
So as I said to you earlier, basically in at least the United States, we basically, in terms of the power brokers, almost all of them have essentially what they call arranged marriages that are nothing more than business deals.
Yeah, business deals, yeah.
So when you're looking at people today, you have to ask themselves, well, so who are their parents, who are their grandparents? Or if you're looking at, say, people who are prominent 100 years ago, who are their children, who are their grandchildren?
Yep.
And I mean, something I mentioned to you before, Ned Lamont, he's the current governor of Connecticut. He's the grandson of J.P. Morgan.
Really?
J.P. Morgan Jr. So he's the great grandson of J.P. Morgan the first.
Yeah, to Ned Lamont, who's the governor of what state?
Connecticut.
Oh, of Catholic Communist Connecticut.
Correct.
Started by Puritans and men of God, but now completely given over to the Pope. Connecticut. He is the grandson of who now?
J.P. Morgan.
Grandson of J.P. Morgan. Tell me about J.P. Morgan, would you, George? And I'll add a few words.
Well, okay, I'm just going from memory here. Among other things, he was a knight hospitaller, if I'm not mistaken.
And he was a knight, member of the Order of St. Lazarus, which is another form of the Knights of Malta. It's one of my students is in that order, and he told me that when he was inducted, a powerful Knight of Malta came to his induction for the Order of St. Lazarus, and they use a green Maltese cross. That's their symbol. Okay, so he's the grandson of J.P. Morgan. J.P. Morgan, that evil, wicked sinner who consolidated all the wealth of America into his hands. You can read about that in Edmund Paris's work, Secret History of the Jesuits, also in another work called The Vatican Against Europe. He mentions J.P. Morgan. So J.P. Morgan was the man of financial power in this country, and he was the overseer and participator in the sinking of Titanic. Or Olympus, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, well, okay. Yes, indeed. Now, I had a number of other topics I wanted to address, but I guess we went a little bit long. Try to address at least one of them. Now, today is November the 21st. Almost a month ago, on October 25th, there was we're told in Lewiston, Maine, a shooting rampage in which an Army reservist by the name of Robert Card, who was 40 years old, broke down, had a psychological breakdown, and started shooting people. He started out at a bowling alley, then he went to a restaurant, and he went to 2 or 3 different places, and he's supposed to have killed at least 18 people. Some sources say 22, and shot numerous others. Now, it turns out that the chief medical examiner for the state of Maine is John Alexander, Dr. John Alexander, and he got his undergrad degree, from the aforementioned Boston College.
So the chief medical examiner of what state?
Maine.
Maine. And what is his name?
John Alexander, Dr. John Alexander.
Tell us about John Alexander, brother.
Well, he's the one who was basically overseeing all the autopsies of the shootings. And he got his undergrad degree.
What did you have to say?
Well, I'm not exactly sure. I haven't read his statements as of yet, but I guess he's in charge of the cover-up. He said, oh, yes, these people were all murdered by Mr. Card. And of course, I'm not sure if he said this, but of course, he's the killer. I mean, he's basically...
Of course. Mr. Card's the killer. Now, I want to tell you and the listeners of a couple that came to my class last week. Very dear Christian people. They come from a Mennonite Amish background. And they have a large property in Bolivia. And they told me that at the Columbine shooting, they killed, well, all the witnesses for the most part, but there was one guy that was shot who survived, and he played dead. And he survived, and he started to talk, and he had to flee the country. They helped him flee the country. And he came to their place, and he tells the whole story. The one that did the shooting at Columbine was an FBI shooter on the roof. That's all fact. So all these shootings they have, every last one of them, from Sandy Hook to Columbine, you name it, are all black ops of the FBI, CIA, intending to drive this ignorant and stupid and ungodly people into the belief that they should give up their guns. And when that happens, it's over. So I just want you to know that that couple was in my church building last weekend. And they told me they know the man. They didn't want to give me his name, but he lives down there in Bolivia now, and he can't come back here, and because he talked, and he and his mother's life were threatened. So there was an FBI shooter that did all the shooting at Columbine, folks. Good old fornicating bastards of the Inquisition, started by the Pope and his servant, J. Edgar Hoover, and the Congress with an executive order. And the first head was a Roman Catholic whose name was Bonaparte. So it's the holy office of the Inquisition in the American Empire, in the Holy Roman American Empire. But go ahead.
Okay, so, and I mentioned the chief medical examiner for the state of Maine. As I said, his name is John Alexander. He got his undergrad degree from Boston College, which is Jesuit. And you have the Attorney General of Maine. His name is Aaron Frey, F-R-E-Y. And he got his undergrad degree from St. Anselm College in New Hampshire.
And St. Anselm is another Catholic school. I don't think it's Jesuit, but it's Catholic.
Well, it's Catholic. For all, we'll say Jesuit. It may not, say SJ.
Well, they oversee all the education. I mean, I have an associate that has an 81-year-old Jesuit friend, and the guy told him, he said, we control all the education in this country. It doesn't matter what university it is, we control it all.
Yes. Now, well, sometimes their control is more open and more obvious.
Right.
So if you look at the state of Maine, it has a population of about maybe 1.4 million people. This is as of 2020, so a few years ago. 94% of whom are white, i.e. of European descent. So
what a sin! Oh, what a terrible sin! There's a place where there's a lot of white people. Oh, God, deliver us!
Okay, so Maine has had a reputation for being a relatively safe state, even though its politics are way left of center. The crime rate is relatively low. So back in 2022, last year, there was something like 29 murders in the entire state. So typically, we'll have 20, maybe 25 murders a year. So what just happened on the 25th of last month was an anomaly. So whether this, okay, we need whether you
stay closer to your microphone, George. You're fading out.
Okay, sorry, my I had to actually grab a drink of water. So what happened in Maine was an anomaly. Did it actually happen? Two, you need to ask several questions. One, did it actually happen as described? Two, was Card the actual killer? And three, if he were the killer, was he